Okay, everyone, let's get started. My name is Evan Weinberger from both Staying Ahead of the Game in the Texas area, as well as Illuminos Academic Coaching, serving the DC metro area. Welcome, everyone. This is part of our ongoing efforts to get information for free into the eyes and ears of parents at a time when, frankly, you guys need it most. I wanted to welcome our special guest, Gabrielle. Full disclosure, I did a podcast with her, and it was one of the most fun podcasts I've done. We really had a great time together. She is a family communication specialist for over 20 years and a parent coach, and she has some words of wisdom to share with us today. I give a lengthier introduction, but she will do that a million times better than I could. So I will let her finish introducing herself. But thank you, everybody, for attending. I hope you find this helpful. As you have questions, please feel free to enter those into the chat box. If we can glance at that while we're speaking and something is emergent, we will try to address the question mid-presentation. Otherwise, we'll try to leave some time at the end to address some questions and consolidate the questions into a handful of themes and try to address them that way. Again, thank you, everybody, for attending, and I will hand it over to Gabrielle. Thank you so much for being here with us, Gabrielle.
Thank you, Evan. I am delighted to be here. I will have some, I've got a couple of slides to share with you, but I figured I'd introduce myself first. My name is Gabriele Nicolet. I am trained as a speech language pathologist. That's a fancy name for a speech therapist, and as a parent coach. And I run a small speech therapy practice here in Washington, DC, where I live. And I also run a parent coaching practice called Raising Orchid Kids, where we see parents around the country and actually around the world for group classes where we dive into sort of what it means to be the parent of a child who works harder than the average bear to kind of be in the world, to be at school, to learn the things that most kids are able to easily learn. And so one of those things that we're going to talk about today is social skills. And I actually hate the term social skills because social is not a skill. It is, the reason we use the term social skills is because it's hard to kind of figure out what it is. It is a way of being with other people. And so we're going to talk in depth about that today, but it's not sort of if A, then B, and if B, then C, right? It's a dynamic back and forth process, which is what makes it so damn hard to teach. And so we'll get into that in a little bit more depth. So I do want to invite you, I know Evan has said this already, I do want to invite you to put your questions in the chat, and we'll be monitoring those, and we will definitely get to them, because I can sit here and present to you for an hour, but if you don't have your burning question answered, then that's of limited use to you. So this is meant to be useful and thought-provoking for you to maybe have some nuggets to take back and start looking at things from a little bit of a different lens than maybe you were before. And actually, do me a favor, put in the chat, how old are your children and what do they struggle with? That would be actually really, really helpful to know. And I am going to, I don't know if I share my screen, I'm not going to be able to see the chat, but I'm going to do it anyway. Go ahead and put that in the chat. The chat box is at the bottom of your screen. And you should be able to just click on that. If you're on a phone, you tap the screen once to get that menu, and you should be able to access it there. Oh, good, I can't see it. Okay. So we're going to talk about the role of how language and social skills are connected. And the short answer is they're inextricably intertwined because we use language to engage socially, right? But it's so much more than that. And so part of what I'm hoping to do today is show you how deep this stuff goes, how deep social is embedded into everything we do, even before language. I'm going to pause just for a second to see, okay, adult, age 26, 15 to communicate feelings, 15, love it. Okay, perfect. So we've got teens and young adults. This is good news because their frontal lobes are maybe a little bit more cooked than they were before. And we can talk about that a little bit later. Okay. So we're going to talk about where does social come from? How do they overlap with, how does it overlap with language? And then we're going to do some Q&A at the end. So when I'm talking about social or social skills or social language, what it is a set of mostly hidden rules that cultures implicitly agree to adhere to. So for example, and some of the ways in which social gets manifested are strictly cultural. So for example, in the US, it's very common to greet somebody with a big smile on your face that shows all your teeth, right? Hi, how are you? Big face, big affect. I'm showing you that I'm happy and delighted to greet you. In some Asian cultures, if you show your teeth when you smile, people think you're crazy, right? That's a cultural, social norm that just kind of is true if we are with certain groups of people. In the same way, when we're talking about sort of social skills within our own culture, when we meet people for the first time, we say hello. We usually don't ignore them, or we usually look at somebody versus not looking at somebody, right? So even within culture, a certain culture, we have some rules of engagement. If I were going to give this presentation and look over here the whole time, notice I've changed nothing. I'm still sort of varying the tone of my voice. I'm using my hands, but I've shifted my focus of attention like somewhere over here. And by this time you're like, what is she doing? Right? Because when we talk to people, we face them. We look at them. Now, I'm sure if you've got kids who are struggling with communication, with feelings, with attention, that at some point somebody has talked to you about eye contact. It turns out, yeah, eye contact is important in social, but, and Zoom is a little bit artificial because I have to be looking at that green dot in order for you to know that I'm talking to you, right? So it feels like I'm looking at you. But my guess is you are not, your gaze, your eyes are not staying focused on my eyes. That's weird. That's not good social behavior. When someone else is speaking, turns out the listener is meant to kind of look away and then look back, and then look down and then look back. But whoever taught anybody that? Nobody. Nobody taught you that. And we don't tend to teach our kids that unless they're in a very excellent school where somebody notices that something's a little bit amiss, and we do teach that. And there are whole curricula that are addressing sort of this social component, these unwritten, implicit rules that permeate our entire lives. Most of us learn them automatically, but some of us don't. And when we don't, we really notice it. And so social is one of these things where we notice much more when something has gone wrong than when something has gone right. Right? And so you recognize its absence, but you don't necessarily recognize its presence. And we're going to find out in a second, many of these skills come before kids learn how to talk. And so that's what we're going to see next. Okay, so there are some pre-linguistic, some root skills. And I, kind of like the metaphor of a tree. A house is another great way to think about this. So if we're talking about the foundation of the house or the roots of the tree, there are some things that need to be in place in order for good social skills to emerge. One of the big ones, and my guess is, I certainly see many people who, many kids who have challenges with regulation and sensory processing, right? Sensory processing and self-regulation, regulation of your body, right? A nervous system that is functioning well is a prerequisite for good social skills. Why? Because if I'm spending all my time and energy and bandwidth, mental bandwidth, just trying to not feel like I've got the heebie-jeebies, right? Because I have poor proprioceptive skills, for example, or I kind of just don't feel right most of the time. My brain is going to be focusing on trying to get me regulated, not on whether I'm looking at somebody when they're talking. Right? My brain has other priorities when these prerequisite skills are not in place. Okay. Joint attention is another one that we see is a prerequisite skill. I have to be able, my brain has to be able to look, to share focus, to share attention with another person. That's the classic triangle. Child is walking down the street, child sees dog, points at dog, looks at mom or dad to make sure, hey, do you see what I see? Right? That's joint attention. Reading a book together is another example of joint attention. Playing a video game together is another example of joint attention. And we've got kids who continue even into their teens who struggle with these skills. It's no wonder that they're experiencing social difficulties. And again, we're going to talk more because all of this is additive. Sorry, I need to mute my phone. There we go. Initiation is another big one. Now, initiation means how often am I reaching external out to you to tell you what I need or indicate that I want something or that I see something? Am I starting communication with you? That's a really important prerequisite skill for social interaction, right? If you've been at a party where you have to ask all the questions and the person you're talking to never asks a question of you, right? They don't initiate, they only respond. That becomes awkward and uncomfortable because that person is breaking, again, these unwritten implicit rules of communication, which is we share the burden, right? We both initiate and we both respond in a conversation. I have my screen up here. There we go. Relationship is another big one. How safe do we feel with other people? If I'm not feeling, again, this is back to sort of regulation and sensory integration. If my brain doesn't feel safe, I'm going to spend all my time and energy just trying to feel safe. And whether that means I'm running away or I'm running toward or I'm hiding or I'm fight, flight, or freeze, right? That is all going to affect whether or not I've got extra bandwidth to be monitoring how I'm coming across to other people. So the next one I want to, well, let's talk about motor planning for a second. Okay. So there are two other things there are three more things that I want to talk about. One is imitation. In other words, we learn by watching, right? And again, if you, in the previous slide, oops, there we go. Most of us learn these social skills from watching other people, right? Some people don't. And so if your imitation skills are not sort of happening the way that they need to be, you're going to miss a bunch of stuff. That's going to impact your social ability. Learning by doing is another way. So motor planning, if we've got motor challenges, that's going to be another way in which social can be affected. Because if I can't do what everyone else is doing, or if I can't do what somebody's asking me to do, then I am not going to be participating kind of in the social fabric of the group. And most of what we're talking about here is group situations, particularly as regards teenagers, right? They are now in a point in their life where much of their much of their interaction comes from peers, not so much from adults and teachers, although certainly many of the kids that, many of these kids that we work with, I call them orchid kids. Again, they're a little bit delicate. They require a certain set of circumstances, right? Kids who have learning challenges. They certainly are benefiting from the help of an adult, but socially, sort of, they're more peer driven, right? And so that makes this, all of this, a little bit more complicated. Okay, theory of mind. This is another term that gets thrown around a lot. It means, can I step into your shoes? Can I understand that what you're thinking in your brain is different from what I am thinking in my brain? And this seems like, well, of course. And yet, so many of the kids that I work with, and so many of your kids, I'm imagining, have a very difficult time conceiving of the very idea that what they think just isn't true in the world, right? Their brains are wired to think that their reality is reality with a capital R. And when we start to break that down, of course, we realize it's not true, right? I have my thoughts about what's happening. You have your thoughts about what's happening. I have my plan for the walk we're going to take. A friend of mine posted a beautiful post on her autistic son on Facebook last week. He likes to go on the same path, the same direction every time they go on a walk. His brain craves sameness. He cannot understand why his brother, who's neurotypical, doesn't want to go on the same walk every time. He can't imagine that that could possibly be true, because his brain says we go on the same walk every time. And so you can see how in the real world, and I love this example because number one, there's siblings involved. Number two, there's kind of this habit of a walk, and you're like, well, what's the big deal? Well, to this autistic child's brain, it is a big deal. And to the other sibling's brain, it's not a big deal. In fact, it's a bigger deal to keep doing the same thing the same way, right? And then you can start to understand where the behavior comes from. And so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit next. I want to pause here. Does anybody have questions? I'm just going to take a sip of water and pop your questions in the chat if you have them. Okay, while I'm waiting for that, there we go. How do we quell it before kindergarten? Chiquita, what is it? How do we quell what? It's a great question. I just want to understand how to answer it. So these, while she's typing, here we go. Quell the social. Okay, yeah. Let's understand something about social, emotional, and behavioral components of communication. All behavior is communication. And so if we have behavior that we don't like or don't want to see, undesirable behavior, that is actually, I want you to see if you can switch your mindset a little bit to, I need to get rid of that, from, I need to get rid of that, to, this is giving me information, right? So thank you. And I see, yeah, good. So when we're seeing difficulty with social, and we're going to get to this in a second, but when we are seeing difficulty with social, it tells us something's too hard. And we want to kind of look down the chain, down the tree, because usually the difficulty is coming from somewhere in the roots, right? Usually there's a foundational skill there that hasn't been integrated, hasn't been addressed, and maybe needs to be worked on a little bit. Okay, so whether that's theory of mind, understanding, and this is true for kids with autistic kids in particular, they struggle sort of throughout their lifetime with understanding what is it that other people are thinking about and how can I know that? And there are fantastic programs. In fact, I'm going to put something in the chat. Oh, you won't be able to see it. We'll link to it afterwards. Socialthinking.com is a fantastic resource for all things social. Excuse me. So this is an ongoing process. And this is slow, or it can be. Okay, let's talk about language. So we're going to start building in some language here. Now, some of your kids have these foundational skills in place. They're regulated, they understand what other people are thinking, and things are going well. But they have a language learning disability, or they have ADHD, right? Or they have some executive dysfunction. When we add language, it gets more complicated, right? Because why? Auditory spoken words are fleeting. They don't last hardly at all, and then they're gone, right? So if I've got an auditory processing disorder and I hear you say something and I can't make sense of it in real time, I'm going to look like I've got some real social disabilities here, right? Because I'm slow. I'm not reacting quickly to what it is that you're saying. And then the speaker is like, why aren't they laughing at my joke? Or why aren't they answering my question? Okay, so then you can start to see how a language learning disability is going to look like a social problem. And actually, it kind of, looks like a social problem, acts like a social problem, is a social problem, but not in and of itself. It's not due to a lack of desire to socialize or even a lack of skill necessarily. It's a timing issue in that particular case, right? Understanding multiple meaning words, understanding and using idiomatic expressions, puns, humor, jokes, all of these things are language-based social constructs. Sarcasm, I should have put sarcasm on here. There's so many devices, language devices that we use, right? Where kids who are having difficulty with social don't understand or might not understand the difference between, watch this, nice day and nice day. The only difference was what? My facial expression and the tone of my voice, right? The words I said were the same and I meant two totally different things, and you got that immediately. How do we even teach that? I mean, the fact that, I say this all the time, the fact that we're not like just bumbling around, like crashing into each other and like just kind of doing this all the time is miraculous. It's really not until we see somebody struggling that we realize how complex all of these behaviors are. Human beings are incredibly complex. Human brains are incredibly complex. And so the reason I like to think of that is because then, you can give somebody a break, right? You can start to have some compassion for when certain things are not going the way we expect. You're like, well, of course they're not. It's so complicated. And now we've got to break it apart and see what the parts are and see where the difficulty lies, right? That's the intervention. And that's what Evan's group is so very, very good at doing, is breaking that stuff down, right? So all of these things we're going to talk about. I have a fun slide for you next. Inferencing skills. This is a big one, right? Like when kids are learning to read, we're always like, we show them a picture and we ask what happened, right? The girl is crying next to her bicycle. The wheel is not round. What happened? Well, lots of kids will say, I have no idea. How would I know this? And again, unless we're practicing, well, let's check out and see if everything looks quite right. We got to break this down, right? Is the wheel round? I mean, who actually asks themselves that question? Not very many people, unless we're teaching social skills, right? So figuring out what's happening and making inferences, educated guesses, right? This is something that many, many kids struggle with. and just kind of getting the gist of a conversation or of an interaction, understanding sort of what's going on. It means you have to be processing a lot of information in real time, very, very quickly, and often in noise. Because if we're talking about groups of teens hanging out, right, then there's a lot of background noise. Think about, I mean, now they eat lunch outside, but think about how noisy it is outside on the football field during lunchtime. It's crazy out there, right? All right, check this out. So here are some like real basic ways that things can go sideways from a social language point of view if we're using, if we're sort of thinking about how language gets played with. Yeah. A bicycle can't stand on its own because it's too tired. Now, this relies on being able to read, right? Because you have to know that TWO is the number 2, which is true about a bicycle. And I love explaining jokes because they're so not funny when you do it. But anyway, but you also then have to know that TOO is a different way to spell two. That means overly, or too much, right? A lot. And so that's cute, right? Ha ha, chuckle, chuckle. A bicycle can't stand on its own because it's too tired to stand up. But somebody who's having trouble processing social language is not going to get this. They're going to say either they spelled two wrong, incorrectly. And by the way, I've been working my entire life to understand how to spell TOO and understand when to use it. So this is not funny at all, right? Or they're not going to think it's funny because it's just true. On the left, you've got this I'm so excited, right? Which is playing on a sound-based way of thinking about language. And again, for many kids who have language learning disabilities, they're so focused on the meanings of things. Like they have struggled so hard just to learn what things are called and how to call them, that this is a bridge too far. And so they don't see why this is related to excited. They're like, why is there an egg? I don't understand. It's very literal. Here's a joke I love to tell my 2-year-old clients. Who's there? Boo, boo-hoo, why are you crying? Same thing, right? Same as the too tired. And then think about this these homonyms, right? So a bat can be a baseball bat and a bat can be a flying bat. How do you know which is which? And if your brain goes to one because it's used to kind of defaulting, because I'm a big sports nut and I always just think of a baseball bat when I hear the word bat, but somebody's talking about the bats in their attic. Now, all of a sudden, I'm getting the wrong gist of this conversation, right? I'm not able to follow the conversation because my brain has done something that's completely outside of where it needs to go. All right, I am seeing some questions. We're going to stop here. Will we be able to have access to the slides? Yes. You will be able to connect with me through Raising Orchid Kids? Yes. For a 2E ADHD teenager who loves reading but seems to have difficulty organizing his thoughts when communicating, is that mainly because his brain has too much information clashing and is difficult for him to organize? Any suggestions to improve his communication skills? Yeah, I think what we want to do from a social perspective is weed out. We want to weed out as much information as we can and then put it back in systematically. And so it sounds like, Jenny, that he loves to read, but he can't talk about what he's read. And so when that's happening, I know for a fact that Evan has lots of resources on this, but a graphic organizer is going to help, right? What's the who, what's the when, what's the what, what's the how, what's the arc of the story? How do we answer all those questions? How do we plug in the details? But yes, this is a social and executive functioning issue, which is absolutely making sense, especially if we've got somebody who's 2E. Now, here's the thing with somebody who's 2E, right? they know they're very, very smart. So we have to honor both of those things, which is your brain does some things very, very well, and your brain does some things that you need to work on. And that's just part of self-knowledge and not fighting against what is, and sort of self-acceptance, which is, by the way, a big part of social too.
So Gabrielle, kids can be very sensitive. And so how do parents find the right balance of being honest, like, listen, that was awkward, and let me tell you why, versus being encouraging and positive and a cheerleader, and not discouraging kids to try again? How do we find the right balance? Because we want to be honest and tell them where they're falling short and what was perceived as awkward, and give honest feedback, because that has value. But we also don't want to crush spirits and where kids kind of crawl back into their shell. So how do we strike the right balance? And maybe it's age specific, and maybe it's for kids under a certain age, this is the approach, but once they get this age, that's the approach, So can you speak to that?
Yeah, happily. So there are a couple of basic principles, regardless of age, that I like to go for. One is brain-based talk, not self-based talk. So I'm going to stop my share for just a second. I really love to think about the self, with a capital S, as being distinct from one's brain, as being distinct from one's body. And I teach this concept to kids as young as 15 months. And this applies through the lifespan, I think, because here's the thing. If we are asking children to learn new skills that are hard for them, to reflect on their own behavior at some point, right? So, and this is kind of, I'm going to just sweep broad strokes here. If we're going to ask them to monitor their own behavior and their own language and their own social skills, and we're going to teach them all of these things, we have to get buy-in before any of that happens. And the way we get buy-in is by letting them know in no uncertain terms that their self, again, capital S, they are 100% worthy. This is a big deal. And this is fundamental. They are 100% worthy. And their brains have strengths and weaknesses. And their bodies are learning to be in communication with their brains. Okay, and then we can put social skills in there, we can put relationships in there, we can put whatever we want in there. When we've separated out self from brain, then we can introduce this element of self-knowledge, right? So, and of knowledge about your brain and how it functions. And I really highly recommend even somebody who's in first grade, who's having trouble, for example, first grade is often, when we're starting to catch dyslexia and reading disorders, your brain has trouble making sense of what it sees and what it hears. That's all. It's not like you have dyslexia, you're fundamentally flawed, right? So there's a really subtle difference there. But I think it matters. And I think it matters across the lifespan, because again, if you understand how it is that your brain works, then you can accept it and you can move through it. And it doesn't excuse anybody from working hard, right? It doesn't excuse anybody from having to engage in a challenge once in a while. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But it lets you do so from a place of power, because you know that you are whole. There's nothing wrong. It's just how things are right now. So that's part of it. The other part of it, I think, is to provide, and again, this is at whatever age or stage your child is, to provide just enough support and just enough challenge. So I often talk about a just right challenge. The just right challenge is that place where kiddo is willing to try, able to have some measure of success, but has to stay in that kind of performance zone, right? And that, again, that is going to be different for different kids at different ages and stages. And so the way you're going to know if a challenge is too big is because you're going to see a meltdown, or you're going to see refusal, or you're going to see depression. And you're going to see behaviors either acting out or kind of imploding. So exploding or imploding, that are going to let you know, oh, something here is too difficult. Excuse me. And what do we do about that? We make things easier. And then we build it up. And we don't say, here's what we don't say. We don't say, oh, you've got to learn how to do this. They already know that. If they didn't already know that, they would just keep trying and failing and not caring, and trying and failing and not caring. But here's the thing. They try, they fail, they care. They're not stupid. I say this a lot too. Orchids are not stupid, right? They're very intelligent, a lot of them. They will not continue to engage in strategies and in activities that they know they're terrible at. Why would we ask anybody to do that? That's horrible. Nobody wants to go to work and be told, God, you sure suck at your job. How long would you last in that job? Not very long. Or how would you feel if you had to stay, if you felt like you had to stay? How would you feel about yourself? Not very good. And yet we ask kids to go to school every day and get either explicit or implicit messages that they suck at what they're doing. So when we're asking the question, sort of, how can we better support them? I think the answer is we create this just right challenge, right? How much support do they need in order to start having that taste of success? Because success begets success and failure begets failure. And so if we're in a failure spiral, nobody wants to do anything about that. Like, in other words, the child can't get themselves out of that. Adults have to help with that. And the way we do that is we lower the barrier. I don't know, Evan, did I answer your question?
You did, and there's a tangential question here. How helpful is self-awareness for kids? And is the self-awareness teachable? In other words, can it truly be trained?
Yeah, it can. And again, when I say, I do this with kids as young as 15 months. It's so fun. We do that. We kiss our brains for doing good work. So we kiss our, and again, this is not appropriate for teens, but my point is we can teach this very young. One of the ways we can teach this, and if you know anything about mindfulness practice, much of the mindfulness literature is completely applicable to neurodiverse children and teens. A meditation practice is a really good idea for all human beings, and particularly for neurodiverse teens, as hard as it may be to get them to sit down and do it. But again, if we're training this early, then we can start to be aware. And again, it's what we can teach is self-appreciation and self-acceptance. We get into this trap a little bit of thinking that if we don't criticize our own shortcomings and the shortcomings of others, then we will not improve. That we can't improve ourselves, and we can't help our children improve. And I would really strongly suggest that the opposite is true. The more we can delight in the strengths of our children and have them also delight in those strengths, the more we can accept our own shortcomings and acknowledge them and show signs. And this is sort of on the parent side, what are you doing? How are you showing your child that it's okay to fail? That's a big one. Nobody wants to fail. We're all running around trying to avoid failure. And yet our kids, our neurodiverse kids, are failing multiple times a day, every day, and they feel like crap about it. So how are we normalizing that? How are we normalizing effort? How are we normalizing recovery, resilience, grit, right? All those are terms that get thrown around. And then, we want to sort of clear the whole highway so that, our child can have a seamless experience. They're gonna experience adversity. But again, a just right challenge where nobody's experiencing too much failure and they're experiencing a little bit of success. That's the sweet spot. That's the sweet spot.
So Gabrielle, what are some signs for parents to look for that they just, it's now time for some new tools in my toolbox? I might be doing more damage than good at this juncture, and I may need a little bit of extra help. And then can you kind of parlay that into how families find you and all the cool things that you do? And there are so many cool things that you do, and how parents find you, the age groups kind of that you work with, and maybe what working with you, actually looks like, in practice.
Yes. There are a couple of different ways that parents can work with me. One is parent to parent. So me with you, and we leave your child completely out of it. Turns out there are some mindsets, some mind shifts, some things to think about when we're raising children who are struggling at school in particular, but also sort of struggling generally around social skills that we can really jump into that have a major impact on home life. So if parents are feeling like home life is really stressful, I have to fill in the blank, we can work on some of that so that parents are feeling less stressed, like they have to do less. And this is as counterintuitive as it seems, like, no, my child needs to do all this stuff and I need to help them do it. Sometimes what we need to do is take a break and sort of examine the contents of our own minds as parents. And so that's one way that parents can work with me is through coaching. The other way is through the Raising Orchid Kids classes. We have a new class coming up in January. My co-teacher, Jen, and I, there's a 6-week class. We're going to meet, I think, during the day this time. We run it 4 times a year. We teach you all about behavior. We teach you all about manageable goals. We teach you all about how to manage behavior is kind of how to manage behavior and what to do about it. And then how to start implementing some independence at home. We also have a membership. If you come through the class, you can stay and have ongoing access to us. I wonder, you probably could submit for your FSA, is my guess. The other thing, and again, this is back to my comment previously about, we think that unless we criticize ourselves and others, that we're not going to improve. Many, many times what I'm asking families to do is dial back the expectations. Not that we're going to let children flounder, but that we're going to provide a little bit more support, a little bit more stability, a little bit more success, just to smooth out everybody's nervous system, to smooth out the stress levels, and to get everybody sort of back on the same page. This gets harder and harder to do the older kids are, right? Because they've had more years of failure, but it's never too late to do this work. And I would highly recommend, if you're feeling like, your teens are ornery and depressed and disrespectful and isolated, it does not have to be that way. And so if that's pulling at you and you're like, I don't like this doesn't feel good. Raising Orchid Kids is a great place to come. We can do some coaching as well. Those were the main ways. And those are
How do you recommend if a family had, as a child and are interested in working with you, a professional, how do you recommend that they explain that or talk to their child about, hey, we're gonna let's come here with me. We're gonna work. How do you recommend they present that? And again, it might be age specific.
Yeah, the Raising Orchids program is just for parents. So none of what I've described here involves the kids, although that would certainly be interesting. So I don't know that is actually required. But I do recommend, to the extent that, you feel like your child is able to understand, and I would say, age 7, 8, 9, I am going to go learn some strategies that are going to help me teach you about your brain. I'm going to go learn some strategies that are going to help me manage my brain. There's a funny thing that happens, which is we kind of escalate each other, right? So when our children are amped up, when they are starting to flip their lids, as we say in Raising Orchids, when they're starting to lose it, we can feel ourselves starting to lose it. And why is that? It's because underneath all of the things, we think it's our job to keep our children alive, and it's our job to keep our children happy. And that's actually a kind of a fatal error in the thinking, but it is what gets us amped up. And then when we're amping up, then they're amping up. And then we're just kind of screaming at each other, right? Because that's how brains are wired. We're wired to sort of mirror each other's emotions. And so that simple, not easy, but simple fact of just kind of trying to stay calmer, that actually goes a long way. And a major part of what we're doing in Raising Orchids is just getting parents to sort of recognize what their triggers are and stay calm throughout them. I'm going to be able to share these slides with you, but I wanted to talk about emotions real quick, because so many of our neurodiverse teens have an emotional vocabulary of 2, maybe 3, right? So things are either good, bad, or fine. But within those categories, there are so many emotions. And so this slide is really meant just kind of as an illustration of just how many gradations of feelings there are that are available to us and that make life a human experience that it is. These are sort of top level integration skills. They're going to be very clear, but they are dependent on strong roots and a strong trunk. And so when you are seeing difficulty with social, difficulty using language in a social way to communicate with other people, look down the tree. Start with the roots if you have to. Is this person dysregulated because something happened that is making their brain kind of freak out? Nobody does well in a social situation when that's happening. We got to get that sorted first, right? Then we're going to come back and start dealing with social. I'm so happy that everybody could be here. Evan, I know you're going to jump in here.
Yeah, I am. This is great. I mean, this is just rich with information, and it just kind of reminds us, for all the folks who are maybe more on the neurotypical side, where the social skills, which I know you have issues with that term, but these social competencies, I'll say, are just, innate. And we don't realize how many tens or really hundreds or thousands of times, we experience this every day, and it just kind of comes naturally for so many of us. And this is just a great reminder that, for wonderful creative folks who are not neurotypical, that, it's absolutely a struggle to understand all the nuances of social skills. And it's not so simple. You can't, the rise and fall of the Byzantine Empire, you can open up a book and read about it, right? Like, but social skills is this interesting cocktail of learning, developing tools, practicing those tools, trial and error. And we do that, so many of us do that from such a young age that it just comes so natural. I remember learning to drive a stick shift car, and it was really excruciating for the first few months. And then it's like breathing, it's just second nature. And then it is for the rest of your life. But that's just not true for everyone when it comes to these social competencies. So what a nice reminder and a great presentation, rich with information. I'm seeing comments here, clearly much appreciated by by the audience. If you, Gabrielle, in the last few minutes here, want to put your website or links to your podcasts or Facebook groups here for folks to make a note, that would be helpful in kind of finding you. One question I had is for the folks here. Are there any 2 or 3 books that you recommend as like an interesting starting point for parents, that you've read that you think kind of have it right? That would be a good starting point. I don't think it's a substitute for seeking support and learning some new tools from a professional like you, but it's always nice to have a few books in the arsenal to read. Is there anything that you recommend?
Yes. I love The Self-Driven Child by Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson. So that's Stixrud. I think that book for parents of teens is phenomenal, because the teen years, and again, we talked about it in broad strokes, but teen years are really where parents are taking a back seat, right? And we are starting to become more coaches than instructors. And that process can be really challenging and feel a lot more challenging when we've got neurodiverse kids who don't look ripe to us. They don't look ready to do this. But, something as simple as getting oneself out of bed in the morning, that is a skill that a 9-year-old needs to be able to do. And a 15-year-old sure as hell needs to be able to do. Now, any one specific child may not be at that point yet, for example, but in Bill's book and Bill and Ned's book, that what they do is basically show you sort of how to, sort of why you should do that and how to back yourself up out of it, right? So we will always want to meet the child where they are, but then we always want to program for independence, particularly in the teen years.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Gabrielle. This was so helpful, so rich with information. I hope everyone in the audience, thank you so much for joining us. Our next webinar, we try to do this on the second Tuesday of every month. Our next webinar is scheduled for January 11th at 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 Central. These are about an hour to tuck nicely into your lunch hour. Again, just an ongoing effort to get just great information into the hands of parents at a time that I know you need it most. The impact of COVID on kids' education and social and emotional development in many cases has been devastating. And I think wherever we can get information is to help us out as parents is just so incredibly helpful. And Gabrielle, thank you so much for your time. You're amazing. This is clearly not your first rodeo. Thank you for bringing 2 decades of experience and expertise to us. Again, Illuminos, you can find more information about our proprietary and research-driven executive function program at illuminos.co. And for those of you in Texas, joining us from Texas, SAOTG or stayingaheadofthegame.com. We have some wonderful blogs there with information. You can sign up for either newsletter or both with very timely tips on ways that you can help your kids, whether you're a professional or a parent or an educator with executive function skills. We are also active on Instagram and Facebook for both Staying Ahead of the Game and Illuminos. But thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with us. And Gabrielle, we can't thank you enough for your willingness to join us here. And she's wonderful, guys. So if you think that she can help you and give you some new tools, please find her and she's always developing new and neat ways to get you new tools in your toolboxes. Just been a wonderful resource. Gabrielle, it's always fun. I'll never forget our podcast together. I hope we can do another one soon.
So fun.
And happy Tuesday, everyone, and happy holidays. Enjoy the rest of your week, and hope you have a restful and meaningful holidays with your families. And in true excellent time management fashion, it is 12:30 on the dot. So thank you very much. Cheers, everyone. And once again, the presentation has been recorded and should be available under the resources page at illuminos.co within about a week. So please check back. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.